Hello artists, and welcome to day 77 of the Epic Journey. I'm DaleneFM, and today we're going to be seeing the completion of our little impressionistic landscape. Alright artists, while you sit and watch me paint, I'm going to describe to you what I'm doing. The process of the little impressionistic landscape that I've been working on is a lot quicker than what the glaze portrait was that we were doing earlier, because there's none of those very fine layers where you're working in a lot thicker, more impasto paste and working a lot on wet. 90% of the painting is actually done in the second layer, which is what we watched yesterday, and today's layer is just touching up on the very, very brightest of areas. Now back in the Impressionistic era, a lot of the landscape work would have been done a la prima, all in one go, from blank canvas to finished painting within a matter of hours. And of course, in the case of people like Monet, where he would spend a day out in front of his lily pond painting, he would have had 3, 4 or 5 canvases going at once, because as the light changes, so he would then move to the next canvas. So he would start early in the morning on his morning canvas, and then as the light warmed up, he would then move on to the next canvas, and so it went. And then he might well have gone back the next day to finish them. I assume that's what happened. But at the end of it, he would have 5 complete paintings at 5 completely different times of the day. Of course, now with me doing this in studio from a photograph, none of that is really an issue, so I didn't have to finish it all in one go. I could leave it to dry and come back the next day when the paint was a little bit more sticky and just add some of the complete high values onto some of the brightest areas, because I did feel that when I was painting the bulk of it yesterday, I had gotten to a point where the paint was a little bit too thick, and if I'd put any more paint on, it was going to start blending on the canvas, and I didn't want that to happen, because one of the hallmarks of Impressionism is that the colours are relatively clean. Now I'm not saying that you don't mix colour at all, but there was little mixing of colour on the canvas itself. If you did mix colour, you would mix it on the palette. Now what I did in this case was that some of the greens were mixed. I had two greens on my palette, moss green and permanent green, but there were some parts where I felt the moss green, although the moss green was the right colour, it was too transparent, so I mixed it with the permanent green, and then I just added a little bit of the burnt umber to it to bring it back to the moss green colour, but then it was opaque, which is what I wanted. I wanted the opacity of the paint, I didn't want transparency. I did mix some paints together to get rid of the transparency. I also did mix some of the yellow and orange at time to make a mid-orange. When I felt that the orange was too bright and the yellow was too light, then I did go somewhere in the middle, and I allowed a little bit of mixing to happen on the canvas to a certain extent. You'll see some of, especially in the road, in the middle of the road, and either side of that sort of bright yellow middle line, there's kind of a mixing going on of the umber and the orange, so it's not completely clean colors, but to the best of my ability I did try to keep those colors as clean as possible, with very little interference one color with the next. In the foreground of the little road that's right in the front, I needed lots and lots of texture and lots of bright colors, because there's lots of reflection going on that road surface of that rising sun. So I try to keep the reds and the oranges and the yellows really clean then, particularly in that area. I did find myself feeling a bit overwhelmed and really out of my comfort zone, and that was probably a good thing in terms of Impressionism as well, because the Impressionistic paintings were out of their comfort zone. They were certainly out of the comfort zone of the accepted art style of the time. So I quite like the fact that I was out of my comfort zone on this one, and I think as artists as well, we need to push ourselves beyond our comfort zone to be able to produce something. You know, if we do what we've always done, we will produce what we've always produced. So it's good to do something different, even if it's quite contrary to what you may feel you're the best at doing. It's quite good to do something different, because it opens up the doors to other aspects of art that you may not necessarily have explored otherwise. And although something like this is not what I normally do, I do find it really inspirational to attempt to paint like this, and I've done a few paintings like this purely for my own benefit, really, you know, not necessarily for exhibition or for anybody else, but almost as practice runs to try to help me see another side to painting that I may not have explored otherwise, or that I certainly didn't explore otherwise. You know, my painting traditionally has been very photorealistic, and as it's gone through the years and as I've attempted to loosen up, I have definitely found my painting gets a better quality about it. I like the semi-loose style of what I'm painting at the moment, the style that I'm painting in at the moment. Although this painting is a lot more loose, and I did that on purpose, of course, because I was trying to demonstrate Impressionism. I'll recap. Impressionism is to try to emulate an impression of an area. So one thing that I may not have made clear in the very first lesson, I remember mentioning that I looked at the photograph and then put it aside and not looked at it again while I was forming an impression in my mind. I did, however, look at it while I was painting. Don't get me wrong, I didn't paint this blind out of memory. I'm not that kind of artist. I did look at the painting again. I did look at the source material again before while I was painting it, but I tried to look at it as seldom as possible, so as to try to not allow the fact that it was a photograph that I was working from detract from the fact that I was trying to paint my impression. So I didn't study it, and I didn't try to emulate it in its tiniest finite little detail. I did have it there for when I needed instruction or when I needed direction on where a color goes or where a particular element goes. So I wasn't painting blind, so forgive me if that came out a little bit wrong on the first lesson. That wasn't the case at all. I needed to formulate in my mind an impression of what I was painting, and then I needed to try and keep that impression foremost in my mind while I was painting, because I'm not an impressionist in the traditional sense of the word, and I'm not painting plein air like the traditional impressionists would have done. I was trying to almost reproduce what one would have experienced in a case like that, to give this painting the best chance of being impressionistic as possible. There was a lot of painting that I didn't refer back to the original photograph, and when I did, I tried not to allow the photograph to direct my brushstrokes more than the impression that I did have of the photograph. There's a fine line between the two. I do think that painting like an impressionist is an incredibly challenging feat. I think sometimes the impressionists, or loose painting in general, might get a bad rap because people will feel that photorealistic painting is far more impressive than loose and more impressionistic or more emotionally motivated styles could be. But personally, I completely disagree. As beautiful as photorealistic work can be, because they are so exquisitely accurate and it takes a lot of skill to do them, I totally agree. I do think there's a lot about photorealism, particularly things like hyperphotorealism, where you're so perfectly reproducing the photograph that you're working from, and let's face it, 90% of them are photographs. There's very few photorealistic artists that are going to be working from life, because there's just not that kind of time. Photorealism is a very, very slow process, whether it's drawing or painting. So there's just not that kind of time to work from life. So to work a photorealistic painting down to its finest detail, you're rendering a photograph almost exactly. There's not a lot of the artist going into it. Now, I say that with trepidation because there's a lot of viewers of photorealism, as well as the artists that produce photorealism, that will disagree with me because they feel that the photorealism is the artist, and that very well may be the case. It's highly arguable, so I'm certainly not going to dispute that. But in my humble opinion, something that's looser, that's more expressive, can contain much more of the artist in the work than something that is more highly photorealistic. And for that reason, it can feel very difficult to paint something that is so impressionistic, because it's a much more of an ethereal, out there, pie in the sky kind of thing that you're trying to achieve, as opposed to photorealism, where you know exactly what you're trying to achieve. It's right there in front of you in your source material. All you've got to do is render it to the best of your ability, and those technical abilities that go into it are superb. And the powers of observation and the powers of reproduction, and those artists are brilliant. But in Impressionism or in loose work, you're trying to do something completely different. You're not attempting to reproduce something visually correct. You're attempting to reproduce something emotionally expressive. I'll linger a little bit on the finished artwork now, so you can just take a moment and have a look at the finished product. Notice the bright reds that are in those greens particularly, and the very bright center of the painting that is very white. I actually came back with some titanium white when the lower layer was slightly drier, and I really pasted up that white to give it a nice good thick solid white, remembering that titanium white is temperature neutral, so that's the best white for that, because you wanted a white that was going to be warmer, on the warmer side, with all those oranges and yellows, than a white like zinc that was going to clash because zinc white is much more cooler than titanium white. There's a lot of big, bold, bright brush strokes in this painting. Not all Impressionists painted bright, and those that painted bright may not necessarily have been as bright as this one. Bright paint and clean colours was part of the tools that the Impressionists used to create the works that they created. So artist, that's our little landscape painting finished. It was great fun, I have to say. I really enjoy doing this kind of thing because you get the chance to do some experimentation and play around a little bit with colours. You know, when I look at this painting, I think there's a couple of things I could have done better, but I think as artists maybe we all feel that way. We're never completely satisfied with the work that we did. Okay, maybe I'm just trying to make myself feel better about it. Artists, I thank you so much for joining me on this little Impressionistic painting. Please don't forget to like and share, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It was brought to my attention yesterday that the YouTube channel only goes up to day 65, so I will sort that out, I promise. By tomorrow the YouTube channel will be fixed. I had a technical issue there that I wasn't aware of, so thank you for bringing that to my attention, and I will see you tomorrow on day 78. Bye. That's what you want to do.